the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump issues a final ultimatum of 48 hours to Tehran, warning of direct military strikes on the national power grid unless the Strait of Hormuz blockade is lifted immediately. As the conflict with Iran drives global oil prices to record highs, nations around the world are now forcing drastic cuts to energy consumption to prevent a total market collapse. A shocking new investigation reveals that a US-operated Patriot missile is likely the cause of the recent explosion in Bahrain, sparking urgent questions about the accuracy of defense systems. Tehran declares the Strait of Hormuz remains open to all vessels except those linked to enemies, amid escalating military threats from the United States. New Mexico officials are launching a fresh criminal probe into the late Jeffrey Epstein's connections to powerful global figures, seeking new evidence of systemic failures and potential misconduct. US and Ukrainian negotiators met in the United States in a bid to revive stalled talks on ending the 4-year Ukraine war launched by Russia. Officials said US-led efforts to end Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II have stalled since the United States and Israel launched joint strikes on Iran in February, prompting turmoil to erupt across the Middle East. The entire island of Cuba remains in total darkness tonight after the National Electric Union confirms a complete grid collapse driven by aging infrastructure and severe fuel shortages. Chinese tech giant Tencent is embedding the OpenClaw AI agent directly into the WeChat platform, marking a massive escalation in the battle for artificial intelligence dominance in Asia. Now to our top story. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has visited the missile-hit city of Arad, inspecting damaged buildings after Iran's latest strikes. Speaking at the site, Netanyahu said Iran now poses a threat not just to Israel, but to the entire world. He accused Tehran of deliberately targeting civilians and even firing near major religious sites in Jerusalem. He also warned that Iran has developed the capability to strike far beyond the region, pointing to a reported long-range missile attempt toward Diego Garcia. Netanyahu stressed that Israel is responding with force, but not against civilians. Instead, he said Israeli strikes are targeting Iran's leadership, military network, and key infrastructure. He added that Israel's goals are clear: to dismantle Iran's nuclear and missile programs. Meanwhile, he backed US President Donald Trump's call for global action, urging more countries to step in as tensions continue to rise. Let's listen in.
If you want proof that Iran endangers the entire world, the last 48 hours have given it. In the last 48 hours, Iran targeted a civilian area. They're doing that as a mass murder weapon. Luckily, no one was killed, but that's due to luck, not their intention. Their intention is to murder civilians. Second, they fired on Jerusalem right next to the holy sites of the three monotheistic faiths: the Western Wall, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And by dint of a miracle again, none of them were hurt. But they were targeting the holy sites of the three major monotheistic religions. Third, they fired an intercontinental ballistic missile on Diego Garcia. That's 4,000 kilometers. I've been warning all the time. They have now the capacity to reach deep into Europe. They already have fired on a European country, Cyprus. They are putting everyone in their sights. And fourth, they're stopping a maritime international route, energy route, and trying to blackmail the entire world.
Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar and President Isaac Herzog also visited the missile-hit city of Arad after Iran's latest strikes. Saar accused Iran of deliberately targeting civilians, calling it a war crime, and said the attacks aimed to maximize casualties. He added that despite the destruction, casualties remained relatively low. Meanwhile, Herzog said the damage shows the scale of Iran's missile capability. He warned that Iran is deploying all its resources to instill fear, but insisted Israel remains resilient. Let's listen into the comments.
You can see here very clearly the war crimes of the Iranian regimes. You can see a totally civil neighborhood, no military dimension, and the Iranian regime is solely and deliberately targeting civilians and civilian populations. The strategy is to shoot on civilian populations in order to increase the number of civilian casualties. We had here actually a miracle that the number, seeing the destruction all around, that the number of casualties was relatively low. We had also yesterday, as you know, in Dimona, another attack. In both scenes, we have children that was severe.
We're here in Arad, and as you can see, this clearly is a site that shows the havoc from half-a-ton missile from Iran. As you know, the Iranians do not differentiate between Muslims and Jews and Christians, or between elderly and young. All civilians are there to be killed and destroyed. But we are here to show something else, that we are ever resilient. And it's no secret to all of you that Iran is now deploying all of its capabilities.
Now joining us live on the show, we have Nirmal Abraham, who's a political analyst, joining us now from Kochi in Kerala. Nirmal, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. Have we crossed a red line here with attacks against these nuclear facilities in Israel and in Iran? Of course, the potential environmental and health effects of radiation pollution are quite significant. So I'm wanting to know your thoughts on these latest strikes.
Well, yeah, I mean, fortunately, there has been no damage yet. But having said that, I mean, if this continues and, God forbid, something happens, it could turn catastrophic for that particular country. Not only that particular country, depending on the attack and the intensity of the attack, to even neighboring countries. So at this stage, I would say that it's, unlike what Netanyahu suggested, I would say it's a tit-for-tat strategy by Iran, because they're just signaling to Israel and the US that if you can dare to hit our nuclear facilities, we can do it too. That's exactly what they're trying to show. I don't think the intent was to create damage. Yes, civilians have died, but so have civilians in Lebanon, for instance, when Israel attacked. So it's I don't think it's fair to actually put numbers into the brackets of deaths and injuries when you talk about war and who succeeded, who didn't. It's unfortunate that people are dying, no doubt about that, but I think it has happened from both the ends. And Netanyahu, about the long-range missiles, I think he had already spoken in an interview in November 2025 that was given to Ben Shapiro, a conservative journalist in the US. He said that Iran already had intercontinental ballistic missile capability that ranges up to 8,000 kilometers, which was not considered to be true. He even warned the Americans, saying that if you add another 3,000 kilometers to that, that's the US coastline. But today we saw what Iran could do with the 4,000 kilometer range attack, which again raises questions about the future of this war and the impact it could have on humanity. But at the moment, in terms of just the nuclear facilities alone, thankfully, there are no damages. But if America or Israel continues to attack Natanz, which they have already attacked at least 4 times since June 2025. Israel attacked first, a few days later in June, the US attacked, and then again this month there were 2 attacks. So Iran could just claim that it's fair, that they're also trying to signal that we can do the same thing that you do to us.
Nirmal, stay with us. We're now moving to our second guest, Bozal Daragahi, who's an Iranian-American journalist, founder of the Badlands newsletter, joining us now from Istanbul in Turkey. Bozal, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. Could these hits to the energy infrastructure in Iran have a opposite intended effect? Of course, Israel and the United States are have threatened that hits to Iranian energy infrastructure could be a potential consequence if this conflict does keep ramping up. could it have an opposite effect? Rather than hits to the military assets, could these hits to the energy assets, rather than turn the Iranian people against the Islamic regime, create a sort of uniting force?
Yeah, I think that there is some evidence that the attacks on civilian infrastructure are already to some extent rallying the people around the regime a little bit at least. I'm actually not in Istanbul. I'm actually on the Iran-Turkey border, and we've spent the last couple of days interviewing people coming from Iran, and that is one of the things that people are saying. It seems like they are saying that a lot of the targets are not really targets having to do with the Revolutionary Guard, which many people despise. They're not having to do with the regime, which many people oppose, but also seem to be targeting the civilian infrastructure. One person talked about a sports facility that was hit by the Israeli airstrikes. Many people referred to the hit on the school in southern Iran, the Minab school, in which more than 160 school children and teachers were killed on the first day of the attacks. So yes, I mean, naturally you could foresee how hitting things that are precious to ordinary people would rally them around the regime, even if they don't necessarily like the regime for now.
To both my guests, please stay with us now. We're now moving to some breaking news. In a recent Truth Social post, US President Donald Trump has proclaimed that Iran is now dead. Adding on to it, the US president further stated that only the greatest enemy left for America to tackle is the radical left and the highly incompetent Democratic Party. Back to you, Nirmal. You're a political analyst. How are you seeing the effect of this war in West Asia affecting US domestic politics? Of course, the midterms are coming up soon. And there is some controversy in Trump's base about this war. What have you seen so far?
Well, I mean, clearly, if the elections were to be held today, I'm pretty sure that the Republicans would face the heat of the elections, because even within the party, even within the conservative circle, there are different opinions. I mean, people who used to staunchly support Donald Trump, people like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, even videos of the late Charlie Kirk talking about, his warnings on U.S. war on Iran. Steve Bannon, a close ally of Trump. All of these people have moved away from the Israel First policy, and they're actually saying that this is not the America First policy that Trump claimed to be so. I mean, Trump was so popular about when he was elected. So there are, there is a divergence in the party itself about the goal that the U.S. has. And what are they fighting for? Are they fighting for the U.S. or are they fighting for Israel? That's a question that a lot of people raise. And I'm pretty sure that it is going to damage Trump when it comes to the 2026 November elections. Adding to one more point to be added to that, I think, is if ground troops, because if you remember, Donald Trump was chosen. He was elected as the president because of multiple reasons. One of the main reasons was that he promised the people of the United States that he will stop all the wars, that he will not start another war, that he will not send U.S. troops anywhere outside of the United States, and the people will not see the blood of any U.S. soldier. But all of these promises seem to have been broken now, so it seems like people are moving away from the idea of giving blind support to Donald Trump, and they're seeing the consequences. Even people across the board. I mean, I live in India, and we have faced the heat of the Strait of Hormuz closure in terms of oil prices hiking and LPG shortages. So I think the impact is high, and even in domestic politics, I think it is not so favorable for Trump. And if I were to just make a prediction, I think I'm pretty sure that there will be seats lost in the coming election for Donald Trump.
Please don't go far. I'm just going to go to you now, Borzal. What's your statements, your thoughts here on Trump's statement there that Iran is dead? They are obviously not dead. It's an entire country. And their goal in this war seems rather to outlast Israel and the United States, as both countries face pressure from their international allies. Of course, massive pressure on the cost of living globally. Your thoughts on Trump's statement there, please?
Well, I thought it was unhinged and juvenile. That's just not how you talk about war, matters of war, especially when people's lives are at stake. Iran is dead. It sounds like something a street hoodlum would say about another street hoodlum on the streets of Queens, where he grew up. And it shows just his lack of diplomatic experience. And it's also kind of unrealistic, the talk about that. What he means by that, Iran is dead, is like, well, they didn't respond to my entreaties, and they didn't respond to my 6-point offer that we sent through diplomatic channels to give up. So now they're really going to taste it. Okay, what are they going to do? They're going to hit the electrical sites and power supply sites across Iran, and Iran is just going to respond. They are going to respond by striking energy facilities in Israel and the Gulf. This will hurt everybody. This will hurt Israelis. This will hurt Americans. The only people it will benefit are the oil companies and perhaps other energy companies that happen to be his donors. So perhaps from his bubble, this war is cost-free, but from the point of view of ordinary people, whether they're in India or Iran or the United States or Israel, this is a very costly war.
Both of you, please don't go far. We're now moving to our next update. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called on European nations to join the fight against the Islamic Republic of Iran after a recent string of long-range missile strikes that have expanded the conflict beyond the Middle East. Speaking near the site of an Iranian ballistic missile impact, Netanyahu argued that Tehran's growing capabilities now pose a direct threat to European security, noting that Iran's missiles could reach deep into the continent. Netanyahu urged world leaders to commit militarily alongside Israel and the United States, framing the confrontation not just as a regional struggle, but as a global security challenge. European governments have, so far, been cautious in their response. Many are reluctant to become directly involved militarily and instead continue to call for diplomatic de-escalation and broader international efforts to secure peace. Analysts say Netanyahu's appeal reflects rising anxiety in Jerusalem about Iran's missile reach and the possibility of a broader theatre of conflict involving Western allies. Now, back to you, Borzal. You've said that you're on the Iran-Turkey border. How are we seeing this conflict play out beyond the immediate theatre of war? Of course, there's been some reluctance by the US and Israeli allies to join this conflict. But what's your take on the current temperature at the moment?
Well, I thought it was rather telling. I mean, this was a conflict that Israel and the United States went into so boastfully and so enthusiastically and with so much confidence. And now they're sitting there begging the European leaders who they ignored and dismissed and insulted for months and months and months to come to their aid. Wait, I thought that Iran's missile capacity was degraded by 90%, or was it 200%, or was it 800%? So why are they still firing missiles? It seems like they were sold a bill of goods, sold a bunch of lies by their own analysts and own military officers. They've been peddling these lies to the world community for weeks now. Why would they need any help? This is the strongest military in the history of the world, and the strongest military in the Middle East, perhaps in all of Southwest Asia. And now they are begging the Europeans for help. It just doesn't make any sense unless they realize they're in over their heads, and that the Iranian threat and the Iranian capabilities are way more than they had accounted for. So I think that's what's most telling about the Netanyahu's demand for help and his use of, for example, UK media outlets who are all basically sounding very alarmist headlines today, demanding that the UK government get involved in this, all of these controlled by influence peddlers in London. It just is kind of telling that the machinery of war and propaganda is in high gear because they're in trouble.
Borzal, thank you so much for joining us today on the show and for your time. We now move to our next story. The World Health Organization has warned that the ongoing conflict in the Middle East has reached a perilous stage, citing recent attacks near nuclear sites in Iran and Israel. World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom called on all parties to exercise maximum military restraint, emphasizing the heightened risk to public health and environmental safety. In a post on X, Tedros stressed that strikes on nuclear facilities could trigger catastrophic nuclear incidents, with consequences far beyond the immediate conflict zone. The WHO urged governments and military actors to prioritize the protection of civilian populations and the safety of critical infrastructure, warning that the escalation could rapidly spiral into a regional or even global crisis. To some breaking news, the Israeli military says it has killed a Hezbollah commander in southern Lebanon. In a statement, the IDF said Abu Khalil Baji, a commander in Hezbollah's Radwan force, was killed in an airstrike in the Majdal Salem area, along with 2 other members. The military added it has also carried out additional strikes targeting Hezbollah infrastructure across multiple locations in southern Lebanon, as tensions continue to escalate in the region. Israel's Defence Minister Israel Katz says the military has been ordered to accelerate the demolition of homes in Lebanese frontline villages. The decision, taken with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is aimed at removing threats to Israeli border communities. Katz also confirmed that the military has been directed to destroy all bridges over Lebanon's Litani River, which he claimed were being used for terrorist activity. The move comes as the US-Israel war with Iran enters its 4th week. More than 2,000 people have been killed so far, with no clear end to the conflict in sight. Let's listen in to what Israel's Minister of Defence Israel Katz had to say.
ראש הממשלה בנימין נתניהו ואני הורינו לצה"ל להשמיד באופן מיידי את כל הקשרים מעל לנהר הליטני שמשמשים לפעילות טרור. וזאת כדי למנוע מעבר של מחבלי חיזבאללה ונשק דרומה, ובנוסף לכך להאיץ את הרס הבתים הלבנונים בכפרי המגע כדי לסכל איומים על היישובים הישראלים בהתאם למודל בית חנון ורפיח.
Now, back to you, Nirmal. You're a political analyst. We've got this latest update there coming out of southern Lebanon. How does this war affect the political dynamics in Lebanon? Of course, it has a very coloured history there with Hezbollah in the region, but the demolition of these bridges and houses is sure to present another challenge to the Lebanese government.
It is, and I think the Lebanese government are trying their best to get Hezbollah disarmed. They've been trying for many years, hasn't worked, and the primary reason for that is that Hezbollah is far more powerful than the Lebanese military themselves. So they haven't stopped. If you go back to the timeline, 1989, the Taif Agreement, they had already exempted Hezbollah so that they can act as a resistance force, but then that backfired. And every United Nations Security Council resolution that came after that, Hezbollah completely ignored. Even a couple of years back in 2024, they were asked to disarm and disband, but they did not. And so they remain a powerful force. And as long as they remain a powerful force in Lebanon, Israel will continue attacking Hezbollah, and the collateral damage of that would happen to Lebanon and the people of Lebanon. Unfortunately, Lebanon, I would say, is caught in the crossfire because, they already have an economic crisis going on, and now they have a humanitarian crisis and probably a big refugee crisis as well. I mean, even as we speak, I think about 20% of the Lebanese population are already internally displaced. So it's a sad state of affairs, but the only end game that I see to that is either the disarmament of Hezbollah, which the Lebanese government are trying, but I'm pretty sure they will fail again as they have in the last 35 years, or the complete destruction of Hezbollah, which is really hard to achieve for Israel. So as long as either this war ends or they come to another ceasefire, this will continue. And Israel, as you know, I mean, judging from the numbers that we've seen in the last 2.5 years, they don't really mind the destruction of infrastructure or the death of people or the injuries or the displacement of people. So I think it will continue, sadly, and there will be more deaths and destruction, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Nirmal, how do you see the fate of Hezbollah continuing as their major supporter and supplier of weapons and funds? The Islamic regime, of course, faces their own challenges at home. Where would Hezbollah now look to for resupplies, funding, support?
Hezbollah has been weakened, at least in the last 2 years, right from when the Gaza war started to this point. If you look, a lot of their commanders are gone, a lot of their infrastructure is damaged, a lot of their military capabilities have been destroyed. So they are relatively weak at this point. But it depends on how weak Iran gets as well, because at the moment, although Iran is suffering losses, they are fighting back and surviving. And so it depends on the fate of Iran. I mean, how far can Iran stretch this war? How far can they survive, and how much do they have left? I mean, so I think the whole plan of Israel is, as much as US inflicts damage on Iran, they would want to inflict damage on Hezbollah, hoping that Iran would not have sufficient funds or military equipment to provide for Hezbollah by the end of this war, and Hezbollah not having enough military personnel or artillery by the end of this war, which I think is still unlikely. These are all theories that are moving around in Israel and the political circles in Israel, but I think it's very hard to achieve, as we've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm. Nirmal Abraham, thank you so much for joining us on the show and for your time today. And that's all we have time for. Please keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.